This Week with Bob Mueller on News 2.
This week,
we have conservative proposals for your consideration that'll reduce crime, get our economy back up to speed, especially in rural Tennessee.
Governor Lee delivers his third State of the State address, outlining what he calls a conservative agenda.
I think there's some really significant things that were not addressed during the governor's State of the State.
Tennessee Democrats called the governor's address a missed opportunity. Never before seen video of the insurrection at the Capitol is part of the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Dr. James Hildreth is tasked by President Biden to help with the national battle against COVID-19. More options for Tennesseans to get the COVID vaccine. And the Historical Commission takes a big step towards saving history, nearly destroyed in the Christmas morning explosion. More in our This Week cover story. Welcome. This week, steps were taken to save history from the destruction of the bombing on 2nd Avenue. But we begin with the second impeachment of Donald Trump and new video of the mob breaching the Capitol.
Never before seen security footage from inside the Capitol on January 6th. The vice president whisked from the Senate chamber down a staircase to safety. Then the view from inside.
We are seeing the inside view as the mob approaches from outside and beats the windows and doors. And a lone police officer inside responds and begins to spray the first man who enters, but is quickly overwhelmed. Among this group are members of the Proud Boys.
You can see Senator Mitt Romney warned by Officer Eugene Goodman to find safety, then seen running down a hallway. Senator Chuck Schumer and others fleeing too. Staffers seeking shelter wherever they could as rioters breached the building. Many supporters carrying the Trump flag. They again spoke of the heroism of Officer Eugene Goodman, who can be seen leading rioters past a door. That door is the entrance to the Senate chamber. And then the images as they search for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Where are you, Nancy? We're looking for you. Nancy! Oh, Nancy! Nancy! Where are you, Nancy?
Showing the Speaker's staff hiding under a table as the Speaker's office is ransacked. You can hear her staffers whispering in horror.
Like that they're within our line. We need Capitol Police, I think, coming to that way. They're pounding on doors trying to find her now.
It was graphic, visceral, and it was personal for the senators, who now serve as the judge and jury in the impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump, accused of putting their lives at risk.
As we continue to track COVID-19 in Tennessee, some troubling news as health officials have likely identified a case of the Brazilian variant of COVID-19 in the state. News 2's Valencia Wicker breaks down the facts learned so far.
As experts work to analyze a variant of COVID-19 discovered in England, researchers now have a second strain on their hands. This one from Brazil. Dr. Schaffner of Vanderbilt University Medical Center says the new Brazilian variant presents symptoms much like the COVID-19 parent strain, but this one tends to develop at a more rapid rate.
What we know about this Brazilian variant is that it spreads readily, we know that, and it looks as though with tests in the laboratory that our current vaccines will provide very substantial protection against it.
Schaffner says the average nasal swab COVID test cannot distinguish between strains. That's why state officials are taking specimens to labs for more in-depth testing.
My understanding is we're not just doing a random sampling. We're looking for circumstances that are a little different. If individuals, for example, think they have a reinfection, a second infection, or if there's a cluster of infections in a community where there's an awful lot of very rapid spread.
In Nashville, Valencia Wicker, News 2.
Walmart and Sam's Clubs throughout Middle Tennessee are now administering the COVID-19 vaccine. Locations in Clarksville, Mount Juliet, Nashville, Gallatin, and Hermitage are all included, and that's just naming a few. Tennessee's Department of Health Commissioner, Dr. Lisa Piercy, says more pharmacies could get doses in the coming weeks and months.
That does not mean that will be the only retail pharmacy that or chain pharmacy that has it. But right now, when we look at geographic distribution across the state, there are 150 Walmarts in almost every county. And so, particularly in our distressed, in our rural counties, they're much more likely to have a nearby Walmart than they are some of the other chain pharmacies.
The White House has been keeping an eye on Nashville, appointing 2 Middle Tennessee experts to help guide the national fight against the coronavirus. The Biden administration announced its creation of a 12-person COVID-19 task force. News 2's Alex Dennis spoke with one of the new members.
Dr. Hildreth, this being your first interview since the news was announced, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good about this, Alex. Thank you so much.
President of Meharry Medical College, Dr. James Hildreth, has been vocal about his desire for the country in fighting this global pandemic.
You have said before that you hope that there would be a federal coordinated effort as we fight COVID-19. How important is this to you?
I think it's really important, Alex, that President Biden is actually doing that. So I think the task force reflects the expertise we need to develop a strategy to make sure all disadvantaged populations can have access to vaccines, COVID-19 testing.
The Biden-Harris administration's COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force is made up of 12 members located throughout the country. All are experts in their respective fields, ranging from care for people with disabilities to health access in rural communities and nursing homes. Along with Bobby Watts, CEO of the National Health Care for the Homeless Council, located in Nashville and also appointed to the task force.
I think if we don't place equity at the heart of our COVID response, that we will have communities that are left out. But especially with contagious diseases and a pandemic, that if we are not treating everyone, then we are really not protecting the public's health.
Details about when the task force meetings will take place and how often is still being worked out. But Dr. Hildreth does know when a third vaccine will head for approval.
The FDA has set February the 26th as the review date for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And it could well be that if that goes well, that in early March, a third vaccine from J&J will be available.
Moving America much closer to a more familiar normal by fall, says Hildreth. Alex Dennis, News 2.
This week, steps were taken to preserve history after the Christmas Day bombing ripped apart several historic buildings and timeless facades. News 2's Julia Palazzo has more on the road to rebuilding.
Crews spent the day collecting materials and bricks from the Ray building, which is number 166 here on 2nd Avenue. Everything will be analyzed, then stored until rebuilding officially begins. The Metro Historical Commission and the District Fund are funding the project. The goal is to match the original building facades as much as possible. Items were transported by Metro Public Works, and if any items can be reused, bricks will be stored in one secure location, other materials in another. Betsy Williams lived on 2nd Avenue for decades and owned a business in the Ray building. She was here this morning to help start this process, and she spoke with us about how she wants to do her part to help maintain the district's integrity.
And it's depressing to come down here and look at everything and the destruction and go inside the building, but at the same time, as we make steps toward getting underway with reconstruction, it's a return to normalcy. And I just got to tell you, after COVID last year, which pretty much decimated the short-term rental business and the restaurant business, so after that, normal sounds really good. I'm ready for normal.
And several more buildings that are going up towards Church Street, those all have to be assessed as well. And the Metro Historical Commission tells me this process will take several more months. Reporting in downtown Nashville, Julia Palazzo, News 2.
Stay with us. This week continues in a moment. Welcome back. This week, Governor Bill Lee delivered his third State of the State address. He outlined what he called a conservative agenda.
An unimaginable one for us that included the rise of a global pandemic, devastating tornadoes, flooding, violence, unrest, an economic collapse, a downtown explosion, and witnessing our nation undergo painful turmoil at the highest levels of government. There have been heartbreaking losses. We mourn the more than 10,000 Tennesseans that we have lost in these deadly events this year. In many respects, what was optimism has become a tempered feeling of resolve and perhaps even cautiousness about what lies ahead in 2021 as we move forward, but work to make sense of it all. Tennesseans will know tonight that tragedy has no hold on who we are or where we are headed. Tragedy will not define us. It won't rob us of the opportunity that 2021 holds. In fact, this year holds its own unique place in our history as we celebrate 225 years of statehood. We built a strong infrastructure to deliver vaccines and tests directly into communities. And we worked in lockstep with our hospital partners. One of our first decisions was to double down on testing capacity, and we were consistently one of the early testing leaders across the country. We were one of the first to make free testing available to every resident, regardless of their symptoms and regardless of their insurance status. We were the first to purchase masks for every citizen. And as we watched disastrous outcomes at nursing homes all across this country, we were one of the first states to test every nursing home resident and every staff member as well. We were the first state to send monthly deliveries of PPE to teachers and classrooms. And more importantly of all, after 2 months of the commencement of vaccine distribution in America, Tennessee is leading again. We have consistently been in the top 10 for vaccine distribution nationally, and we expect that to continue in the weeks and months ahead. Our response has been effective, and as cases have dropped, many sectors of our economy are roaring. In fact, many segments of our economy are more prosperous than they were this time last year. In the worst of the economic phase of our pandemic, our unemployment climbed to 15.5%. Today, it's at 6.4%. We created the Tennessee Talent Exchange, which connected unemployed workers with jobs. Our workforce participation rate has improved drastically over the past year. It's better today than it was before the pandemic. And we have now exceeded the national average in workforce participation for the first time in 25 years. A strong economy means many things for Tennesseans, and one of them is low taxes and fiscal stability for their government. A recent report shows that Tennessee is one of only 7 states to have positive economic growth since April of 2020, when much of our economy was shut down. 1 of 7. I will add that the work continues for teacher pay compensation. During the special session, we allocated almost $43 million for teacher pay raises, and that was a step in the right direction. And the budget I'm submitting for your consideration this week recommends an additional $120 million be set aside for teacher compensation in the 21-22 budget. After a year and a half of negotiating, Tennessee recently became the first state in history to receive a Medicaid block grant waiver from the federal government. This waiver will allow those in our Medicaid population to reap the benefit from our state's strong fiscal management of the TennCare program. It will also require us to meet a number of quality metrics, so we ensure that the savings will not be accrued by cutting back on the number of people we serve or compromising the services that we currently provide in any way. And furthermore, I'm committing today that we will use the shared savings to do important work like shortening the waiting list for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities who need services. We have conservative proposals for your consideration that'll reduce crime, get our economy back up to speed, especially in rural Tennessee, and support strong families. So we proposed $21 million to invest in rural communities and distressed counties to directly support rural infrastructure, industrial site development, small business development, and revitalizing small-town main streets. To help us achieve our goal of every Tennessean having access to high-speed broadband, my budget will recommend historic investment of $200 million. And now more than ever, Tennesseans want a strong commitment to the Second Amendment and the right to protect themselves. And as such, I will again be reintroducing constitutional carry legislation. As with teachers, my budget recommends a 4% raise for state employees as well. And to help local governments and communities recover from COVID faster, we are proposing a $200 million investment in local government infrastructure grants. This funding will assist local governments with public safety projects, upgrades to utility systems and IT projects, capital maintenance projects, such as road improvements and new school construction and school renovations. This has been a very long and challenging year for our nation and for our state. There has been tragic loss of life and loss of incomes and loss of learning for our kids. In many respects, one of the most difficult years in recent history. Tennesseans, transformation will define us, not tragedy. And the state of our state is indeed hopeful.
Stay with us. This week continues in a moment, and Democrats respond to the governor's address. Welcome back. Tennessee Democrats represent a small but vocal minority that is pushing back hard at much of Governor Lee's State of the State address.
I think there's some really significant things that were not addressed during the governor's State of the State. There were significant opportunities to really help our families, our children, to make sure that people have the education they need, the workforce development they need, the health care that they need. And that wasn't addressed today. Tennessee will still be 46 in education funding, regardless of what happened today. We are still $560 million behind Alabama. Tennessee still has 48% of our population that lives in a child care desert and will not be able to have a place to send their kids. Before the pandemic, 10% of our state lacked insurance. That fact still remains. The governor mentioned about the hyper-partisanship in D.C. and what has permeated rhetoric in Tennessee. And I think that nothing was done tonight to tamp that down. Leading up to this election and after the election, we all are well aware of the national crisis that occurred on January the 6th. Instead of trying to put some cold water on those flames, I think our governor just inflamed them. And I hate to say that because I am a strong believer in bipartisanship. You can ask my caucus members. Some of them might not like it, but I believe that if we work together, we can achieve anything. When we chose partisan rhetoric around weapons, around a woman's right to choose, we went in the opposite direction. Guys, we missed an opportunity here. One where we could re-envision what it means to be a Tennessean that knows they can send their kids to one of the best funded schools in the country. A Tennessean that knows that when they need health care and when they're at their lowest moment, they will have access. A Tennessean that knows it's not just a job in a warehouse or at a plant, but it's a career where they can support their families and they can build and lift up that next generation, where they can move from just surviving to thriving, where they can fully participate in the American dream. That's what we want, guys. And I think we missed that opportunity. I think it's great that we're investing in buildings, but I want us to invest a little bit more in people. I want us to make sure that folks can have a good education and a good job and that they can be safe. I want to be able to go to the grocery store and not worry about someone walking down the street with a machine gun because of open carry. I want to be in a place where we respect our law enforcement, and that means also respecting what they say. And they have strongly spoken out against open carry, or constitutional carry, as some folks like to call it. I went through the process to get a gun permit. It's so easy. It's an 8-hour class. I got a 98% on my shooting. Okay, I'm that good. It's easy. So there's no reason for us to pass this constitutional carry. I do hope that we can turn the page on partisan rhetoric, on singling out Democrats. Look, we're small in number, but we represent people across this state. And I'm hoping that we will continue to move forward. We will work with our federal government. There was a lot of noise around local control today. Well, I'm sure our local governments, our local school boards, our local health departments are not feeling that this is a pro-local control government. There was a lot of noise around, oh, the federal government this, the federal government that. Well, I tell you what, when we rely on almost half of our budget from the federal government, so we want their money, we just don't want their advice or their regulation. Guys, enough of that. I just hope that as the governor continues to release his policies, it will be something that we can stand behind. But if it's not, we're here fighting for people, and that's what we're going to do.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Thank you for spending part of your weekend with us. That will do it for another edition of This Week. We hope to see you back here next weekend for another edition of This Week. In the meantime, you have a great week.